the Battle of Sauchieburn, coup and penance. And the thing about Sauchieburn is it's one of those famous battles around Stirling. We have Stirling Bridge, we have Bannockburn, which are very well known. We have Sheriff Muir, which is less well known. And the fourth, which is the least well known of all of them, is Sauchieburn. And the reason that this is less well known is because it's a coup. So one king replaces another king, people are killed, the government is overthrown. That's not the sort of thing the following government wishes to advertise. So that's why it's so quiet. However, second slide, Ross, please. So here we have some broad information, the dates. We have the main combatants, James III, and his son, the Rothsay, who is the future James IV. Interestingly enough, the Duke of Rothsay is, of course, the Prince of Wales, as he's known in England. Now, the battle itself is nationally important. It's designated by Historic Environment Scotland. It is a matter in terms of planning, its significance in planning applications, and simply because, as I say, it involves a civil war, it involves a replacement of one king with another. James IV, or the Duke of Rothsay at the time, is just a teenager, 14 or 15. Now, next slide, please, Ross. The first thing to note is that Sauchieburn is to do with Sauchieburn. This slide shows you Stirling. It shows you the route of the Roman road, Sauchie the house, the Sauchieburn in blue. I think we can blame Walter Scott for this one. Every battle must have a name. The key feature is the Roman road, because the Roman roads built by General Agricola in the 1st century AD is the main way north-south until 1770. So everybody of any significance traveled on the road. Agricola, Septimius Severus, Vengs, Picts, Wallace, Bruce, James I, James II, Edward I, Edward II, Edward III, potentially, in the Second Wars of Independence, but certainly Mary Queen of Scots, James IV, James V, James VI, Robert Burns, Walter Scott, etc., etc., etc. That's the way you travelled. Now, if we could have the next slide, Ross. What shows still got the red of the Roman road, it's got the blue of the Sauchieburn, and then the green is the area designated by Historic Environment Scotland as the battlefield. Now, that's an absolutely huge area, and what it doesn't mean is that the battle took place. What it means is that the battle took place within some of this area, and then there's a buffer zone, and we actually have some degree of doubt as to precisely what's going on. Now, at the very, very northern end of the battle, of the green area, is Coal Hill, which sits high above the Bannockburn, and this is James III's muster point. This is where he starts. His son and the rebel lords are travelling to Stirling along the line of the Roman road. Let me just check. They're travelling along the line of the Roman road. Now, already there is a mistake here. James III thinks he is emulating his ancestor, Robert the Bruce. He goes as far as to get Robert Bruce's sword and carries it with him into battle. But if you've been to Coal Hill, if you've walked along the Bannockburn, if you've seen these things, you appreciate the mistake that James III makes before anybody is even drawn us. He is on the wrong side of the burn. Instead of letting his enemy come to him, crossing the burn, tiring themselves out, which is what Robert the Bruce did on day one of Bannockburn, he crosses Bannockburn, giving up all that advantage, and then charges to meet his son and the troops. He then loses. That's it. That's the official account. That's actually all we know. So the next slide. The next is the official account of what happened. And what we basically have is the late King James, King of Scotland, whom God absolved, father of our sovereign Lord, happened to be slain. That's the official account, because it's a coup. The king is dead, long live the king, but let's not talk about who killed the king. So next slide, please. So a little bit of a background. It's actually astonishingly common, this idea that the son challenges the father, or the uncles challenge brothers, or the uncles imprison nephews. There's a litany here where Scotland is still recovering from the second wars of independence. James I, brother, is killed by his uncle, the Duke of Albany. James I is held hostage in England. The Duke of Albany is begrudgingly pays the ransom. Basically launches a coup. James I executes his uncle, murdered Duke of Albany, of course, famously on the beheading stone. James II kills the Douglas, throwing him out the window. He is blown up trying to besiege Stirling Castle. And then you have James III as an infant king. We've got James III, obviously young. James IV is a youngster again. So we have, throughout the whole of the late 14th and early 15th century, a series of unstable monarchs being challenged both by members of their family, cousins, uncles, and members of the wider aristocracy. Scotland is not particularly stable at this point. Now, next slide. Ross, we're on slide 7, I think, by this point. I hope we're on slide 7. Slide 7 should have a picture of James III on it. He's generally perceived to be quite a rubbish king. One of the main complaints by his nobles is that he doesn't pay for jousting. James II was quite big on jousting. James IV was quite big on jousting. There is an enormous joust in the middle of King's Park in Victoria, where Victoria Square now is, that James II organised, and it had an Arthurian theme. James IV reorganises the Royal Park and moves the jousting ground to below the castle, what we know as the Butt Field. James III is probably born in Stirling, but yeah, the general perception is he's quite tight. His big achievement is to marry Margaret of Denmark and receive the Orkney and Shetland Isles as the dowry. But he's generally unpopular, he's generally tight, and his nobles gang up on him to depose him and basically use the young king, the Duke of Rothesay, to as a kind of figurehead for that. So if we can get the next slide, Ross, that's just a blow up showing. I should have had that one earlier, I'm afraid. That one shows you the detail of Coal Hill, where the communication mast is, which is incidentally one of the best views of Stirling if you ever have to walk that way. It's very good. If we move on to the next slide, Ross, which I think should be slide 9. Now, one of the things that happens is if there is no official account of a battle, all sorts of things emerge. And we have a later state, Robert Lindsay of Pitscotty, that talks about this idea that James III retreats from the battle across the ford at Milton, that he is startled from his horse, he falls down, he wanders to the mill, which is no longer there. He knocks on the door, and we have this great line, when asked who he was, this morn I was your king. The miller's wife runs out to get a priest. the priest, and of course it may not be a priest, but the priest is brought, and on hearing that the king wants to confess, produces a knife and kills the king in his bed and vanishes. Now, all of that's very interesting, and it's the kind of standard account. If we have the next slide, Ross, please. The thing is, it's just fake news, I would say. The story achieves 4 points. It's basically there to imply James III was an incompetent coward. His death was nothing to do with good King James IV. He was clearly a great king and no need to murder someone. And fundamentally, it was all to do with those nasty Catholics. And isn't it a good thing that we've had the Reformation and we've got rid of them? So, now the thing is, at this point, if we get the James IV, who you'll see here, he is Catholic. He is possibly Scotland's greatest peacetime king. You will, of course, remember that it all ends badly for him at the Battle of Flodden in 1513, and we end up with another young king, James V, and of course James V young, and we end up with another infant king, Mary Queen of Scots, and of course Mary Queen of Scots is deposed, and we end up with another infant king, James VI, who of course becomes first. But the impact of the Battle of Sauchieburn on James IV is profound. Now, James IV is Catholic. He was instrumental in the death of his father, patricide. Now, that's quite a major sin, and impact on James' psyche, on his soul, is profound. Now, he's not the first king of Scotland to have committed a murder. In fact, it's probable James IV didn't commit the murder, he just led the troops that they were committed by, or the death of the king was committed by. Robert the Bruce commits murder under a flag of truce, on holy ground with the Red Comyn. Malcolm III, probably Macbeth, probably kills Macbeth's son, or stepson, certainly kills Macbeth's stepson, Lulich. So there are lots of Scottish kings that kill people, but James seems to take this to heart. So this has a profound effect on Stirling. If we get the next slide, please, Ross. So Stirling benefits from this. So we have a major focus of royal investment in Stirling. So there are both religious works and civil works. So some of the religious works invites the Greyfriars to Stirling. So that's an act of penance. He's investing in religious infrastructure. The Greyfriars are under the Stirling Highland Hotel. He helps to repair the Church of the Holy Rood after a fire. He re-endows Campus Kenneth Abbey to act as a suitable mausoleum for his father and the intended burial place of himself. He is never recovered from the Battle of Flodden. He transforms the chapel in the castle to a collegiate chapel. He invests in St Ninian's Kirk, trying to turn that into a collegiate chapel. All in all, he's a profoundly religious man, a profound man, and he tries to do good. The other things, of course, is he wears an iron belt around his waist to mortify his flesh for the role that he played in his father's death. And for the last 100, 200 years, anytime a skeleton emerges with an iron belt round its waist, it's supposed to be James IV. Now, he is particularly interested in Stirling, possibly because he's born here, possibly because his father died here, but Stirling benefits from this. And we have this incredible investment. So we've seen the religious investment around Stirling. If we get the next slide, Ross, please. We also have some civilian investment in stirling, we have the Great Hall, the largest Great Hall built in Scotland. We have the monumental entrance that you walk through to get to the castle. That's James IV. We heard that he reorganised the Royal Park. He transforms the jousting ground. We know that we have investment in literature, in arts and science. We have Damien de Falkis, possibly research into unmanned flight. We have the construction of the Great Michael, possibly the largest ship in the world, or the largest ship in Europe at the time. We have one of the best equipped army in Europe, unfortunately badly led at the Battle of Flodden. And of course we have the Wallace sword. Now, the Wallace sword is of course in the National Wallace Monument. It's a massive, huge affair. It's clearly not the sword wielded. There are at least 3 different swords. The sword, however, is definitely the sword that James IV was told was his sword. So I think what happened is the sword was in the Royal Armouries, was being stored, and because it's another time of tension with England, James brought to him as a suitable propaganda tool. And of course, it's either a bit rubbish, it's decayed or it's lost. So they manufacture a sword that is suitable for Wallace. It's a suitable propaganda symbol. That's why that sword is so huge. That's why it has an early 16th century handle on it, because it's a Wallace sword fit for a king. And all of this, of course, is happening in Stirling. All of this money, all of this skill set is happening in Stirling. There's then the inspiration that the king gives, because of course Robert Spittal, James IV, leaves money, is wealthy because of the trade with the king. He leaves money to all sorts of good causes. We have the Spittal Trust. We have 2 Spittal bridges, the Spittal Bridge at Bannockburn and the Spittal Bridge at Doon, which is known as the Deanston Bridge. And if you think about just the level of benefit we've derived from those bridges alone. So the other thing, of course, that happens in Stirling, and this, I think, is my last slide, is that there's poetry. There is poetry and song. Now, some of this is a little hard to grasp. James so we have William Dunbar, we have Robert Lindsay. Do I mean Robert Lindsay? Can't remember. I have forgotten. We have a variety of people, poets and playwrights, all working in Stirling. There is a very funny poem by William Dunbar called Dunbar's Dirge to the King in Stirling, which is addressed to James IV. James V thought it was highly scandalous, and the poem is written from the court being in Edinburgh. And it purports to be about when James IV goes to Stirling, because he's reminded of his father's death. He treats Stirling as a place of penance, a place where he is depressed, where there's no frivolity, and in the poet's mind, it becomes purgatory to Edinburgh's heaven. So I've put one of the little, one of the final stanzas in here. It is meant to say it's incredibly tongue-in-cheek, but that final, and if you can find it, it is well worth reading. It's quite funny, and the Scots is not too broad. So the final stanza: "Come hame and dwell no more in Stirling. For the hideous hell, come hame and dwell. We've got fish to sell, our name but sprilling. Come hame and dwell no more in Stirling." And sprilling here, I think, are sprat. Very, very plain food, very simple fare, because Stirling is where James does penance for the role that the role he played in his father's death, and of course, Stirling benefits from that due to axe penance. but also royal investment and a place in the Renaissance. Stirling was without parallel in Scotland. Anyway, that is the final slide. That's the end of my speaking bit. And I understand from Ross, we're going to do some questions, hopefully. We'll quite how that works. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening.
Oh, thank you, Murray. That's amazing. You see lots of hands of applause going around. That was thoroughly enjoyable.
Good.
There's two ways we can either do questions. You can either raise your hand or you can type a question within the chat box that's available as well. Either will be fine. So I've got the chat box up there, but if anybody's got a question, just raise your hand and I will unmute you. I see John Sanders there.
Wanting to know what the weapons in a battle of this date would be. In a way, it's what would we be likely to find under the ground at Bannockburn? Is it early shot, or is it arrows, arrowheads, or what?
Right. Well, yes. Okay. There are cannon at this point. There are cannon from the middle of the 14th century and the final siege of Stirling Castle, where the future Robert II, David II's nephew, besieges Stirling Castle with cannon. We know that the Battle of Pinkie and the rough wooing in the middle of the 16th century, the Scots are still using bows and arrows, and the English are guns. So there could well be cannon. There will certainly be bows and arrows. There have been some limited metal detection in and around Sauchieburn. Well, there's been quite a lot, but it's quite small scale. A handful of coins have turned up. Unlike Stirling Bridge and Bannockburn, where most of the weapons are iron, and there are few coins except silver coins, there seems to be a bit more bronze in amongst the small finds from Sauchieburn. So I think the smith claims to have a cannonball from the area of Sauchieburn, and cannon were or crackets of war, as they're called, were available. But whether or not this particular cannonball is from the Battle of Sauchieburn, I'm not sure. The difficulty is really the sources are absolutely silent on it because no one wants to talk about one king killing another king. Although I suppose ultimately we can blame Robert the Bruce for this, because the Declaration of Arbroath gives a stronger, better king a legal basis to overthrow a weaker king. And certainly Mary Queen of Scots and James II are deposed using arguments which build on the Declaration of Arbroath. But I've jumped aside there.
Do you know if there's been any evidence from works done around Coal Hill, like when the M9 was built or when the mast was put up, that's been unearthed through any archaeological work that could link to this?
When our archaeological work wasn't filmed, or the M9 or the roads, working at the designation for the battlefield is 5 or 6 years old. Archaeology, development-led archaeology, wasn't really done 30 years ago, and it's become more commonplace in the last 10 to 15 years. A couple of the housing estates, some of the more recent communication masts metal detection has been done. I cannot remember precisely what I think we're talking about 4 or 5 large-scale or largish metal detection exercises, but these have mainly found coins they've found 15th century coins which are potentially contemporary with the battle, but no weapons or shot or ammunition have been found yet.
Okay.
No other questions then?
Sorry, I did try to speak there, but I had myself on mute. I've got a hand up there, but I'll get to Jack in a second, but I've just had another question on the chat from Colin, was who was supporting James I if his bands were against him?
Well, no, I would have to look this up. But basically, Scotland is always split. There are always people pro and anti. The nobles are, to a large extent, semi-autonomous. We could find out, definitely find out more about who was on either side. A very accessible summary of the battle is by Historic Environment Scotland. If you search Historic Environment Scotland Sauchieburn designation, you'll find it, the documents. But the nobles changed side with the wind. So Bannockburn is the best example of this. So the Wars of Independence. So Sir Philip Mowbray, who is in charge of the castle when the Bruces besiege it, turns the English king away, gives the castle over to Bruce, then fights with Bruce, and later dies in Ireland, I think. His brother is involved in the Sewell's plot, which emerges immediately after the Declaration of Arbroath is signed, and his corpse is dug up and treated in the kind of judicial afterwards. You find and I'm trying to remember the leader of the English garrison during the 1304, the Scottish garrison during the 1304 siege by Edward I of the castle, whose name escapes me, but he ends up taking sides after having been starved at the castle by Edward I, pledges to Edward's side, and basically Bruce captures him during the siege of Perth, and he dies in chains in the Western Isles. So everybody changes sides with wind, and it extends where you end up when the music stops and which chair you're sitting in at the end, and whoever wins rewrites history. Yes.
I think we had a question up from Jack, and I've also got one for Jim, but I'll go for you, Jack, first, and then get to Jim's question.
Okay, thanks, Murray. Murray, I wanted to bring it up to a more modern situation. Think about, because of the wide area designated as the battle site and the uncertainties about some of the details of the battle site, how does that affect modern planning and so on? Is that quite a big issue, or is it something that you have to deal with pragmatically?
It's certainly something that has to be dealt with pragmatically. Basically, what you do with the planning is you take the whole area. Then within that, there are key areas. So the Roman Road in Sauchieburn, Coal Hill. These are likely locations that are important, are significant, and then everything around that are really buffers. So I mean, it's easier to expand again with the better known sites, so Stirling Bridge, Bannockburn, Sheriffmuir. Within those, there are areas that you certainly wouldn't wish to have anything built on, but then beyond that, there are areas that perhaps you wouldn't want a wind turbine built in case it overlooks the in case it overlooks the bigger area. But yes, pragmatism is the key. So not every aspect of a designated battlefield is hugely important. And the more you look at them, the more you realise how arbitrary they are. And if you look in detail at the Sauchieburn one, you find that some of the boundaries are modern roads. The roads certainly weren't there in the roads certainly weren't there in 1488. So it has to be pragmatic. Just as an aside, while I was speaking, I was Googling the Siege of 1304, and the commander of the Scottish garrison is Sir William Oliphant, and he ended up working. So having been starved by Edward, he ends up working for Edward, and ends up being arrested and dying in chains for Bruce. His cousin, who is also Sir William Oliphant, ends up signing the Declaration of Arbroath. It just shows you cousins, families, nobles, which way, where is the main interest, and they've all got things. So yes.
Isn't there a William Oliphant who's got a plaque to him at Edinburgh Castle?
Well, the trouble is there are two William Oliphants. So I suspect both William Oliphants are in Stirling at the same time. One William ends up working for the English, and the other ends up working for staying with coming back to the Scots side. So I think that's probably the second one, who is the cousin of the chap who is captured at Perth.
Thanks for that, Murray. I've got another couple of questions. One is, has there been any archaeological work on the Broadside battle? And did the English have any role in supporting James III or IV? So what was the English's involvement in that?
Right, so let's start with, has any archaeological work been done on, was that just in general on the battle, or?
On the Broad battle site.
An awful lot has been done. So, but it's mainly metal detecting, and not a huge amount has turned up. So there is something called, so West Plean, which is a wee village. There's going to be a new, is that a new village around there, a new housing estate? We call, no, I can't remember the name of the development. There was often on there and very one of the problems is with Sauchieburn in particular, and with the earlier the battlefield, the harder it is. So there's lots and lots of material from Sheriffmuir. None of that's a problem. There's very little from Stirling Bridge and Bannockburn. Sauchieburn in the middle. Given we don't really know where the clash is, we know it probably followed the Roman road. We don't really know, was it a clash that lasted an hour? Was it all day? Where was that? That's where Dix will be. And that bit is probably coming, that's running across Bannockburn House grounds towards Cat Craig, Crossside Farm. Possibly that's the area of the fighting. There has been metal detecting there, but there needs to be more. The role that the English play, the English are always playing something. There would always be making attempts to undermine someday. James the Fourth ends up marrying Henry VIII's sister, and I don't think Henry VIII is on the throne at this particular point. But you've got to remember, Edward III, the Second Wars of Independence are finished slightly over 100 years prior to this. Flodden is in 1513. The English are never far away from interfering in Scottish events, just as the Scots are never far from interfering in English affairs in the same period.
Fantastic. I've got another one here from Libby saying that Wikipedia's quoting that there were 30,000 in King's Army and 18,000 in the Rebel Army. Is this just a guess? Or I know you said we have very little actual evidence or any documentation for that period, but is that a good guess on the sort of scale of the battle?
It's as good a guess as any. I think there are figures in the again, the Historic Scotland's guidance. Figures in the Historic Scotland guidance about the level of the battle. So that would be a good place to start. I've just spotted an email from somebody that missed the lecture. I couldn't find the password. But yes, I'll type him up later. Sorry.
No. I don't know if many of you have noticed this, but the actual date for the password was the date of the battle with Sauchieburn. So bonus points to anybody who guessed that or noticed that.
I didn't.
Have we got any other questions? I'll just look through the room. If anybody's got a question, just raise your hand and unmute yourself. Or I can unmute you. No. I think I can't see any hands. Are we okay there then? Oh wait, sorry, I've got one for Stuart.
Sure.
And that's you, Stuart. If you just go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the murder of James III is always put down to being a monk or a friar. I've read somewhere that it's also suggested that it could have been one of the Stirlings of Keir was involved in that. Do you have any background to that?
I think generally all of the accounts that purport to say anything about the murder are decades later. The official accounts say nothing. So the difficulty is, are people claiming credit for something or blaming someone else for it? And these things will just change to suit the contemporary political mood. I mean, again, it's like the Kirkpatricks claiming to be the ones that I'll make sicker. I'll make sure that the Red Common is dead. Is this them taking the blame off the Bruce? Is someone blaming for, so there's the way history is, it's rather ambiguous. It always is, and especially in the case of a coup, Stuart. So it's not something I'd feel confident about.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't seen it often in the history books, but there was, I can't remember the historian, reckoned that the Stirlings of Keir had a beef about James III, and this was an ample opportunity for them to have a bit payback. But as you say, there are so many ifs and buts about all those stories that we see and hear and read.
Well, I think the thing is, I think everybody had a beef about James III. He was not a good king. But the thing is, if you took that broad, he's not alone. So literally, so Robert the Bruce is a great king. His son David II is a rubbish king. He captured Irish. He offers the throne of Scotland to Edward III's children if they'll let him go. His nephew purports in a coup against him. That's Robert II. Robert II, in turn, is opposed in a coup by his brother. his brother starves his nephew, and kind of is a bit reticent in getting his other nephew back from the English. So that's James the First, and I cannot remember who James the First's older brother is, the one that Murdoch starves to death, and it just goes on, and you know. There's no change. So James VI's children, Charles I is so unpopular, he's beheaded. Charles II is clearly rubbish. James II is rubbish. You know, and then we move into constitutional monarchy when these are just people kept in gilded cages and brought out to stamp open parliament, etc., etc. So. I mean, if you want to go from Robert the Bruce, James the Fourth, James VI, possibly the best three kings we've had in 700 years, or is that controversial?
Right,
Everybody's gone silent, Ross.
Yeah, I think so. I take it as any last questions. I think we're getting on to time there. So I'll just probably like to wrap up, Murray, by saying thank you very, very much.
No problem, Ross.
I can say on behalf of everyone, we've really enjoyed that. We are going to be doing these on a weekly basis. So yeah, if you've enjoyed this, you'll be able to see more. We've got the next one, which is where exactly was the Battle of Bannockburn, Renaissance Stirling, the impact to James IV and V on the city, witchcraft and warfare, and around Stirling, the Roman Empire in Stirling. So got really a bunch of good series of lectures coming up. And I'd like to encourage again, if anybody is feeling very generous and would like to help support this cause, support Start Up Stirling with a local food bank.